Okay, Wiz, I'm going to keep us moving along down the first round. It's been a fun 10 picks so far, let's just say, in this hypothetical world. And now we're looking at teams between 11 and 20. Lots of trade up talk in here, Wiz. I think this is where things could start to get hot and heavy at the wide receiver position. Some teams that we think could definitely attack. And I think for this piece, we'll lay out a couple of teams that we think could be venturing into the wide receiver market in that 11 to 20 range. And maybe what we think about them as a landing spot for a wide receiver. So this one might be less attaching a specific wide receiver, more so just talking about the situation that we might find a wide receiver landing in. And I'm going to kick it off, Wiz, and I'm going to start with the Indianapolis Colts. They are picking at, I believe it's right around, of course, it's the 15th pick. 15th pick for the Indianapolis Colts. And I'm kind of intrigued by this one too, because I've been seeing a lot of mocks having them there, some mocks having them take Brock Bowers, which I might like a little better than a receiver, but I don't necessarily think they need to take a wide receiver. You know what I mean? I totally get the insulating your young quarterback, and we've been preaching that the last couple episodes, but I just think with what Anthony Richardson brings and what he might do to their passing volume, already having Michael Pittman Jr. as an alpha and Josh Downs is kind of a versatile slot weapon. I don't know if there's going to be much room for that guy to eat, not necessarily just early, but ever, because Michael Pittman Jr., young. I think he just got the franchise tag, and Josh Downs, young.
Yeah, you got that, and you got that 3-year deal. Like,
you got a 3-year on top of it.
Yeah.
So they're locked in, right? They have a couple of good weapons. I think Brock Bowers is a little bit different, but at 15, they'd be looking at like a Brian Thomas Jr., maybe an Xavier Worthy. I think that's, I don't know. I think that takes away too much from these other weapons and maybe might make them lean against being a run heavy team, which I think they technically want to do. That being said, I don't think they can't be more of a pass heavy team, but I think you want to play to the rushing strengths of Anthony Richardson. If a wide receiver did come in, I think it is kind of encouraging because Alex Pierce last season, professional sprinter, ran the most routes in the entire league, I believe, did not amass to very much. He was just doing wind sprints out there. So I don't know, man. I think the offensive mind in Shane Steichen is good, but I just like leaving some room to breathe for Josh Downs and even a little bit more for Michael Pittman in that target pie, if available. You know what I mean? So I'm not loving Indy, but I acknowledge that a lot of people are looking at them. And I just think that there'd be hard for me to see enough targets going around on that team. What do you think about the Colts there? And then as you wrap that up, fire into your team, brother.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a good point, man. I think it does feel a little bit like early in the first round for a wide receiver for them. Now, I do think that with the depth in this draft and some of the guys that maybe we'll talk about as we get into the second and maybe some later flyers that we do like as well. I do think it's a position that they probably do address at some point during the draft, right? And I think there are some interesting guys that could probably replace that wind sprinter, Alec Pierce on the outside. So that's a really good point. I think if they were to go skill guy in round one, I'm kind of with you. I think Brock Bowers makes more sense than anything else. Seeing the tight end in a Shane Steichen offense, they definitely have value, right? Like looking back to Dallas Goedert and Philly. Obviously, I'm still holding out a candle. It's still burning for Jelani Woods.
Mine's still burning for Kylan Granson.
Yeah. And that's where we're at, right? So like, look, we like a couple tight ends there, whether they're athletic or, we like what we've seen in short spurts from them. But like, obviously you insert a guy like Brock Bowers is completely different, right? And, yes, Anthony Richardson's not a rookie, but you give a young quarterback, somebody like Brock Bowers, somebody like Josh Downs in the slot who, had some nice moments with Richardson. And then, obviously we know what Pittman can do on the outside. I think if you're trying to maximize that young quarterback, I think the best way to do it would be with like a Brock Bowers versus like an early receiver there and then address it later. So I'm kind of in agreement with you there, Trav. Like maybe not just yet at 15 for wide receiver for the Colts. I'll go a couple picks after that, right? If we move to the Bengals, I think, obviously, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T Higgins, right? But I think what they need to start thinking about, and they largely already have with, going through the franchise tag situation with T, there's obviously been trade rumors for quite a while now, but I think they need to start seriously thinking about life after T, because I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that, look, he's probably going to play out this year on the franchise tag. I don't think they have any intentions of trading him unless something crazy happens on draft night, right, where it makes sense. But trading them while they're positioned to kind of make a run here, with somebody like getting Burrow back healthy for a full season, hard pressed to believe that they move off of somebody like him. But thinking about life after him, right? Like, what does the running mate of Jamar Chase look like? And I think, some of it, the way that, Burrow likes to push the ball downfield, kind of have that jump ball guy in like a T. Higgins. I think this is like one of the first prime landing spots for somebody like a Brian Thomas, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think to quote Matt Harmon again, I think one of the notes that he had in Brian Thomas's reception perception was, a potential T. Higgins like and almost like a faster T. Higgins, right? And with some of the jump ball stuff that you saw from Brian Thomas this past year at LSU, I think there's definitely kind of that mindset where if you were to put him on the outside opposite Jamar Chase, like you could see what that ceiling would look like. So I think like, look, having somebody like him come in, be able to kind of learn under like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase this year. Because the nice thing is you can kick Chase into the slot, right? You can kick Higgins into the slot sometimes as well. So you could still get all three of them on the field a bit during his rookie season and really just kind of get him acclimated so that, when T eventually does leave kind of next year, he's ready to roll, right? So I think that's probably one of the more enticing ones for me for Cincinnati, Trav. Where are you at on somebody like Cincinnati?
I think it's primo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, they're probably not going to be making a trade for them, but they definitely wanted to.
Yep.
And that is the writing on the wall. You know what I mean? And so I think that'd be a great landing spot. BTJ would be money there. It's just like directly slots into T. We've seen that before, right? And so we're
Yep.
already happy about that. I love T Higgins, especially in the Bengals offense, of course.
Yep.
Brian Thomas Jr. would not move that needle anywhere. I would stay exactly there. I would just supplant Thomas for Higgins. And yeah, to your point, I think he is like a faster version. And I love how he's just so big and still maintains agility. It's wild. It's almost like
Yeah.
it's like a smaller version of I can't even remember how to say his name, Victor Wembanyama or something like that. I'm not a
Wembanyama.
basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wembanyama. You know what I mean? How that guy is just like a fucking freak, but he's playing like a point guard. Obviously, he's at the extreme end of what I'm trying to say for Brian Thomas
Sure.
Jr., but what he does at that size is just next level. So that'd be really,
Surprising,
yeah.
surprising amount of wiggle for a guy his size,
Mhm.
to your point, right?
And the LSU connection with Burrow, they never played together there,
Yep.
but you could see some instant chemistry potentially happening. I'm going to give you one more team that think is in that 11 to 20 range that I definitely think is liable to attack the wide receiver position, and that would be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Um, I like them as a landing spot for a wide receiver. I just think we might want to be a little bit cautious depending on who they bring in there. Because if they bring in somebody who's predominantly playing in the slot, I'm really concerned because Wiz, I put a tweet out yesterday. Not
Yep.
so sure they're going to run very many three wide receiver sets. So if we look at Arthur Smith's Falcons from the 2023 season, they only had 90 dropbacks from sets with three or more wide receivers. So that's 3, 4, 5. I picked them all. They only had 81 pass attempts out of such personnel groupings. That was by far the last in the league. And the
Yep.
next team up had 271 dropbacks, 244 pass attempts, and that would be the San Francisco 49ers. About 3 times the passing volume from the Niners, who are one of the lowest passing volumes teams. So we know that Arthur Smith isn't putting 3 wide receivers on the field very often. Similar story in 2022. They were second worst, just under 200 pass attempts from those sets. But remember, their defense was a lot worse in 2022
Yep.
than it was in 2023. So I think if Arthur Smith gets, or obviously he's not doing it, but if that Pittsburgh defense plays the way they can, Arthur Smith is going to be in a lot of 2 wide sets.
Yep.
And so I think the bonus here, if they go at 20, is most of the guys in this range are guys who can move inside, outside. When we look at maybe a Brian Thomas, he's probably mainly outside, which is good for them. And then we look at Worthy, we look at Lad McConkey. I even don't mind Troy Franklin playing a little bit of slot, but I think that might be a little bit high for him. So I think the good thing at 20 is if they go there, then that guy's going to be able to slot into that offense, I think. But if they don't go at 20 and they go further back and get some of these slot guys that we're going to talk about later, I'd be a little bit concerned. So I know that's kind of like painting a negative on what would fall out as a positive based on the guys available, Wiz, but I'm just saying, like, be careful on attaching fully to that second guy in Pittsburgh because I don't think it's going to be a wide receiver production factory like it once was with Arthur Smith in there. But last
Yeah.
point on that is we can't base our whole evaluation on that, right? Because Arthur Smith might only be there for a couple seasons. He's not the head coach.
Sure.
Offensive coordinators come and go. And so just make sure you're betting on talent still. But if it's not one of those upper echelon talents, I might fade a little bit just due to kind of the short-term lack of success that I am projecting here. Is what do you think about the Steelers as a wide receiver destination?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good point, Trev, because like, you think about some of the volume that you kind of talked about, right? I think one of the things that you would hope for in the event a wide receiver does land there is that, I'm not saying that Russell Wilson is a massive upgrade over, Desmond Ritter, because I do think Russ's best days are behind him, but I think we can all agree that he is an
Oh yeah.
upgrade, right? So maybe with a better quarterback in play, maybe that's something he entertains a bit more, as far as deploying maybe three wide receiver sets. But look, I think Arthur Smith has shown us a lot recently about how he's going to run an offense, right? I think it's going to be a run first offense. And when you think about some of the guys that they have in Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, like say what you want about Najee, but he's going to get his volume. And Jalen Warren is like one of the darlings from, an efficiency perspective, right? So, you've got two legitimate options in the run game. You've got Pickens on the outside, and, he's going to utilize Freiermuth as a tight end, as well as we're probably going to get some Darnell Washington love.
I think so.
Yeah. So, right. Like, so you start thinking about it, and, we were struggling with Drake London as the wide receiver one in Atlanta. Right. So if Pickens takes that role, I would definitely worry about volume for somebody, a wide receiver two, coming in there, right? Like, I just think with the way that they're trying to build themselves, they're likely going to be feisty on defense, kind of like you said. I think they're going to plan on winning a lot of games, 20-17, 24-20. And I think a lot of that is going to come via the run game. And then, maybe playing play action off that and trying to hit Pickens down the field, right? I think that's kind of how they're largely going to operate. So I would definitely have some concerns about, a wide receiver heading to Pittsburgh as far as that went.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It will be interesting to see. But again, just make sure if it is one of these upper level talents that they take at
Yeah,
20, don't be too hesitant on it, because that is a good talent whose situation could drastically
exactly.
change in short
Yep.
order. Because I think we know, at least for the next couple of years, the quarterback's either going to be Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, right?
Yep.
And say what you will about those guys, they're more capable distributors than were there the last couple of seasons. And I
Sure.
think Fields might present some really nice upside down the field for whoever that might be. Like if it was like a Worthy or something, even Russ has been a better deep ball thrower. So very
Yeah.
well wrapped up, Wiz. You got your last team on this one. Who you got?
So, bit of a caveat here, right? They're technically not in the 20s right now.
Okay,
Or sorry,
okay.
the teens right now.
We have
But
a
look,
trade.
I think this is like a prime example, man, for Buffalo to move up. When you
Oh
look
yeah.
at Brandon Beane and his willingness to kind of do so, specifically the last few years, I think 4 out of the last 6 years he's traded up in the first round. So that, like, the willingness is there to do that, and I think obviously with Diggs, them dealing Diggs, in the last 10 days, they're obviously, yes, they have Curtis Samuel. I think we like what we saw out of Khalil Shakir and in his time there, but also, like, we're all expecting Dalton Kincaid to take a jump, but like the reality is, dude, they need an outside guy. Like, desperately, they need an outside guy.
Desperate.
Samuel is kind of that, flanker guy. Shakir feels like he's more of that slot guy, and Kincaid's almost just like a bigger slot guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's really how they're going to utilize him. So they need a guy that can stretch the field. They had Gabe Davis depart. They had Diggs depart now. So, like, what does that look like? And again, this is kind of that same realm of, like, there's a couple options here. If they do trade up, I think they're probably competing with somebody like a Cincinnati,
Mm,
for like a Brian Thomas Jr., because Brian Thomas Jr. does feel like the perfect guy to slide in to give Josh Allen that kind of deep threat down the field, go up and get it guy that's got speed to still take the top off of the defense, right? Much bigger body too than Diggs. So as we kind of saw that Diggs and Allen to get on the same page from a deep ball perspective, the last, let's call it, season or so,
mhm.
it'd be interesting to see what Allen would do with somebody like a bigger body guy like Thomas. But the thing is, can they get up in that range, right? Like around there, I think, Trav, what are we looking at? So you've got Seattle at 16, you've got
Mhm.
Jacksonville at 17. Maybe it's somebody like the Rams, but then you just have to kind of hope that, okay, do the Bengals address the offensive line and protect Burrow?
Mhm.
And do you play that
Mhm.
game? So look, I think there's a scenario where I do think the Rams could potentially be interested in trading back a little bit, because it certainly seems like they're going, or they'd probably be going defensive line with that Aaron Donald retirement, and with all these offensive guys going, you're going to see some of those defensive prospects, some of those better defensive prospects, get pushed down the board a little bit. So I do wonder if there's an appetite for somebody like a Los Angeles Rams to move down.
Yeah.
So that would be like, if we're looking at another team in the teens as far as like a really nice landing spot, I could see the Bills trading up. And I mean, wheels up for Brian Thomas if that happens. And I guess the question becomes, Trav, like, where does he move in rookie drafts, right? Like if he goes to Buffalo, how does that work out, right? Does he start? So say he goes to Buffalo and
Yeah.
say Rome goes to the Giants. Like, are
Mhm.
we having any sort of that conversation where you take him over Rome, or are you going that far?
I don't think for Dynasty because of the talent. Like, I love the talent of Neighbors.
Yep.
I think for 2024, I would be drafting Brian Thomas Jr. over Malik
Mm-hmm.
Neighbors in that
Yeah.
situation. And that's like that's that brings him into that top tier almost with those other guys, you know what I mean? Um,
Yep.
Even though talent-wise, evaluation-wise, he's a tier below for sure. So that would be so juicy and so exciting for us fantasy gamers. Would really, really love to see it. I mean, imagine like Rome or Neighbors slipped out of the top 10 and Buffalo was able to get all the way up there into kind of
All
the
the way
early
up.
teens to get one of those guys. That'd be,
Yeah.
I think that's pipe dreaming, of course. I also think it'll be interesting to see what they would have to give up, right? Because moving to
Yeah.
8-17 is more feasible than like a 12 or a 13. And
Sure.
when you look at what they have as far as capital, they have the 60th pick this year, no fourth round pick or no third round pick. Sorry, they got a fourth, and then they got that extra second for Diggs last year. So do they have enough capital to get as high as they want? I think a second round pick on top of that first to get up 10 spots or something would probably be reasonable, but they probably have to give like another pick behind that or something. But
Yeah.
I mean, for your franchise guy, that's totally worth it, obviously.
Yeah.
But just kind of the moving and shaking will be interesting because they have a window too, right? They have a window, and they don't want to go
Yeah.
into the season with 3 slot receivers. I know that Samuel does play outside, but he kind of moves around a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be tough sledding. Tough sled.